1 year on, as France remembers the Charlie Hebdo victims, we look back at the attack that put freedom of speech under the spotlight. Also on today's program, playing a dangerous game, the world unites against North Korea after they claim to have tested a hydrogen bomb. And in picture this, siege in Oregon. An armed group makes a stand against the US government in rural America. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. A year ago today, two brothers stormed the offices of French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo and opened fire. 12 people, many of them the magazine's cartoonists, were shot dead. A third gunman then killed 5 others in the French capital. The 12 months that followed the attack saw the magazine gain global fame. The social media movement Je suis Charlie spread across the world as Charlie Hebdo was held up as a guardian of free speech. But there were debates too. The magazine was accused of a racist agenda and of Islamophobia that prompted a global discussion over how far is too far. Today's newsmaker is Charlie Hebdo, as we ask if there should be limits to free speech.
It was an attack that shocked a nation. Terror in the heart of Paris. The murders at Charlie Hebdo turned the magazine into a global symbol for free speech. And a year on, France is still coming to terms with the attacks. They were murdered for drawing cartoons. 11 people gunned down at the headquarters of Charlie Hebdo, many of them cartoonists. The satirical magazine had previously published a caricature of the Prophet Muhammad. Outside, the gunman also shot dead a policeman. Sharif and Saeed Kouachi had links to Al-Qaeda in Yemen. Witnesses said the brothers shouted that they were avenging the Prophet as they carried out their murderous rampage. Over the next 2 days, France mounted a huge security operation. Another gunman, Amadi Koulibaly, murdered a policewoman and killed 4 hostages at a Jewish supermarket. The attacks led to an outpouring of grief. Je suis Charlie, I am Charlie, became a rallying cry. World leaders joined the French president and millions of others on the streets of Paris in a global display of unity and solidarity. For staff at the magazine, it was overwhelming. But elsewhere, there was outrage. In Afghanistan, Pakistan and other countries, protesters denounced the magazine. Some considered the attacks justified. A year on, and France still grieves its dead. But Charlie Hebdo carries on and continues to be controversial. The killer is still out there, the magazine says, alongside a picture of God with a rifle. 1 million copies of the anniversary edition have been printed. The main target of its satire is still organised religion.
It's a symbol. It's a symbol of democracy, of freedom of expression that we care about. We are lucky in France to still have that.
Like last year, I came to buy it because of the attacks and to support the families. It's dark humor, but it does make me laugh.
This week, a series of events have honoured those who died in the attacks. But France still faces a major terror threat. Last November, it was again attacked and more than 130 people died. People know they are a target and the country fears more attacks. Duncan Crawford, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to discuss how the Charlie Hebdo attacks affected freedom of expression is Carl Sharrow. He's an architect and satirist based in London. And in Washington, D.C., we're joined by Max Blumenthal. He's the senior editor of Alternate and co-producer of the documentary film Je ne suis pas Charlie. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen. Max, let's start with you. Millions proclaim Je suis Charlie because they saw this as an attack on freedom of speech, freedom of expression. You do not. Why?
Well, let me just start by saying hi to Carl, who's someone I really respect. I don't know if we necessarily agree about the role of Charlie Hebdo, but I'm pretty sure we both agree that it's disgusting that gunmen burst into an editorial meeting and killed the staff of Charlie Hebdo. And I think we both agree that governments shouldn't censor writers, that speech shouldn't be outlawed, but we need to address what kind of speech we're talking about and how speech is used in a healthy society. And Charlie Hebdo was correctly identified by former Charlie Hebdo staffer Olivier Siran as an Islamophobic and racist magazine, a deeply cynical magazine that played a corrosive role in French society. And just 2 days ago or yesterday, Riss, the Charlie Hebdo cartoonist who owns 70% of Charlie Hebdo's shares, who's making a profit off of Islamophobia, admitted openly on French radio that he was an Islamophobe. A co-panelist said we shouldn't be afraid to admit that we're Islamophobes, and he said, you're not alone. So we have an open admission here that this is an Islamophobic magazine. And the issue here for me is not about the the speech rights of elite self-styled satirists who really aren't funny or particularly brave. The issue should be the real violence, and we've seen the real violence play out since the recent attacks in France and since the Charlie Hebdo attacks. Hundreds of people arrested, including for Facebook posts, over 3,000 raids in the recent weeks in France since the most recent attacks, and almost entirely against Muslims, against Muslim families, and only 3 of those ensnared in these hyper-militarized raids are actual terror suspects.
I just want to sort of drill down and look at the attack a year ago itself. You had Saeed and Sharif Kouachi, members of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, trained in Yemen. After the massacre, they screamed, "We have avenged the Prophet." 2 days later, their accomplice, Amadi Coulibaly, a member of Daesh, killed Jews for basically being Jews, right? Now, this looks like men committing acts of terrorism, not a community rising up against grievances against racism, don't you think?
No, I would never deny that these were acts of terror, but terror is a tactic. Terror needs to be understood, and the Ahmed Coulibaly and the Kouachi brothers are products of the French state and products of the Republic just as much as they're products of radicalization.
So I want to bring in Carl. Carl, a lot of people say satire is supposed to punch up and not punch down, and Charlie Hebdo was punching down. What do you think?
Well, first of all, as a satirist, I don't accept anyone defining the parameters of the satire that I write for me. And for me, freedom of speech is integral. I think at the moment that we begin to kind of cherry pick, and I think Max gave a very good example there of the arrests for people for Facebook posts. That is a serious danger that happened after the Charlie Hebdo attacks. The response to me is not to support the principle of censorship, as many liberals did after the attacks on Charlie Hebdo, but to stick to the principle. The principle is we have freedom of speech for a very good purpose, because it allows us all to express ourselves. If we stick to the principle, then we can oppose the French arbitrary detention of people just for kind of stating their opinions on Facebook, and for arresting people like Dieudonné for what they perceive to be offensive speech. If we want to be principled, we have to uphold the principle of freedom of speech in a universal manner. And that's far from the case in France. Now, rather, for me as a progressive person, rather than support that and give it moral authority by saying the state should act in a censorious manner and pick who it silences. Charlie Hebdo, for instance, if it behaves in an if it publishes Islamophobic content or cartoons, then we have already colluded with it and giving it moral legitimacy to carry out those acts of censorship. And I find that completely mind-boggling that any kind of person of liberal or a leftist or a progressive inclination would actually support that.
Carl finds it mind-boggling that you would support that, Max?
I'm not aware of any liberals or people on the left who've called for the French government to censor Charlie Hebdo. In fact, as far as I know, the French government began funding Charlie Hebdo as it re-upped its campaign of Islamophobia and racism against the most vulnerable members of French society. And what Charlie Hebdo has done is help distract from the source of the real violence, which is the French state and the war on terror, by directing the conversation to this abstract notion of free speech. You know, something that I've noticed is that Charlie Hebdo is invoked in my country, in the US, typically by people who want to lash out at the weakest members of American society, particularly those who tend to admire Donald Trump, who support raids on immigrants and who support excluding Muslims from American society. And those people who have claimed to uphold the values of free speech after the Charlie Hebdo massacre
Max,
tend
but
to
then
be
you
on the
also have
other
those...
side when my speech is crushed.
Sure, Max, but you also have those who support...
Yeah,
absolutely, you have those who support...
None of that, sorry, Imran, none of that contradicts what I said. In fact, I think it supports what I'm saying, because you're reinforcing your point of view that you want the law to be selective about allowing free speech. So you're legitimizing what the French state is doing. And that is the trap that you are falling into.
Carl, if you give me a second.
Saying we need to argue for the right for French Muslims to express themselves freely and not be afraid of the French government arresting them for Facebook posts, then you should uphold the principle. It's not abstract. It's a principle for a reason.
Okay, Carl,
it's not an
you've
abstract
jogged my
idea
memory
that it's external.
In terms of principle, would you, Carl, share the Charlie Hebdo images of the Prophet on your Twitter profile or on your blog, Carl?
What do you mean, would I share them for what purpose? I mean, I share my own satirical content. Is it, I don't understand exactly the context of the question.
Would you share it in any way, via
retweet?
I
would definitely share it. Okay. Yeah, I have no problem with that. I would definitely share it. I mean, I would share anything. It's not a problem for me. I share a lot of provocative images with commentary on it, for example, saying that this is a provocative image for this reason. Max specifically knows my previous work. I've dealt with a lot of Islamophobic content. I have no problem in sharing it because I spoof it, I undermine it. So I have no idea, I have no problem at all in the image in itself being offensive and being shared. It's for me, it's what I'm saying about it. I'm expressing myself freely. I'm critiquing or supporting it. That is really what matters. But I have absolutely no taboos in terms of what I share.
Max?
Can I make a point about these Muhammad cartoons? I mean, it's not just about sharing images of Muhammad. It's the kind of images that appeared in magazines like Charlie Hebdo. I mean, Charb, who, of course, did not deserve to be killed and should not have been censored, should not be censored by any government, published images of Muhammad's rear end defecating. Caroline Forrest, who's an extremely Islamophobic editorial member of the Charlie Hebdo team, published a favorable article about a Dutch cartoonist who published images of Santa Claus, of Muhammad with a Santa Claus costume on having sex with a
Max,
donkey.
They've also lampooned the Front National, the far right, the Catholic Church. They were equal opportunity offenders, weren't they?
But they were not equal opportunity offenders, and Riss recently admitted that his magazine has become obsessed with Islam because that's what sells and that's what cashes in. That's what gets Riss, a better return on the 70% of the shares he owns.
But you see, this is the problem here. This is the problem here. You're trying to determine whether Charlie Hebdo has a right to free speech based on what you think is the right thing for it to publish.
No, I'm critiquing Charlie Hebdo.
That is not how the principle of free speech operates. If we go back to the culture wars in America about artworks like Piss Christs or the Virgin Mary dung, that I would definitely stand with the right of people to offend Christians with these representations. We shouldn't be selective about these things. We can't establish the freedom of speech based on the content that you deem desirable. That is not how free speech operates.
Strongly put. We don't have much time. Let's get a final response from Max to that from Carl.
I'm not calling, once again, I'm not calling for the government to censor Charlie Hebdo. I'm saying their speech is terrible. Their speech is Islamophobic. Their speech is sadistic, and they're not brave. These satirists are not brave. They're about as brave as an Israeli pilot bombing refugee camps from 1,000 miles up with no chance for the other side to respond. And what we're missing here is that there is a power imbalance in French society. Charlie Hebdo and its neoconservative supporters have the power. They have the power, and the non-Charlies who are being crushed, whose speech is actually being crushed by the violence of the French state, have no power.
Okay.
So this isn't about free speech being answered
And
with
the
more
power
free
can be
speech.
restored by allowing people the freedom to express themselves. This is the principle where you're contradicting
I'll allow that
yourself.
to be the final word because we have
want
run
people
out
to be
of time.
able to express themselves.
Sure. Okay, Carl. Unfortunately, we have to wrap. I have great respect for both of you. Thank you very much for coming on the show to debate freedom of speech in Charlie Hebdo. Carl Sharo and Max Blumenthal, thank you very much. Still to come on the Newsmakers, why North Korea is testing the world with its nuclear bombs. And in Picture This, why there's an armed siege going on in rural America. South Korea says it will resume propaganda broadcasts in North Korea after Pyongyang claimed it successfully tested its first hydrogen bomb. If true, it's North Korea's first ever detonation of a hydrogen bomb, which is even more deadly than an atomic one. The move's already been criticized by foreign powers, including North Korea's ally China. The Newsmakers' Yvette McCullough reports on the dangerous game being played by Pyongyang.
The first H-bomb test was successfully conducted at 10 a.m. on January 6, 2016.
North Korea announcing what it called a world-startling event.
We will not give up a nuclear program as long as the United States maintains its stance of aggression.
This is North Korea's fourth nuclear test in the past 10 years. And if it's proven to have been an H-bomb, the reclusive country will have raised the stakes. A thermonuclear bomb or a hydrogen bomb is much more sophisticated and dangerous than an atomic bomb. An H-bomb is essentially a two-stage explosion. The first is a nuclear fission reaction, where the nucleus of an atom splits, producing two smaller elements. Then there is a second stage, the nuclear fusion, where two or more atomic nuclei come together and combine. This fusion triggers an enormous release of energy that makes the H-bomb so destructive. They have the potential to be thousands of times more powerful than the atomic bombs that devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II. And that's why this test has caused international shockwaves.
Both defense ministers of South Korea and the United States agreed that this is an unpardonable provocation. Japan will take a firm response on this, including at the UN Security Council.
This act is profoundly destabilizing for regional security.
But with the condemnation, there's also been scepticism. Experts say the artificial earthquake the test triggered wasn't strong enough for an H-bomb. And some doubt North Korea even has the capabilities. But is the world underestimating the Hermit Kingdom? Kim Jong-un, a self-styled supreme leader, an eccentric who's apparently adored by his people. But he's also the punchline of international satire. He's often a meme sensation. Hollywood released a comedy about a plot to assassinate him. But North Korea's rhetoric has grown steadily more threatening since Kim came into power in December 2011. Whether this was an H-bomb isn't clear. What is North Korea's determination to realise its nuclear ambitions. And the fact that the long-standing UN, EU and US sanctions to deter it are not working. The only response that is likely to have any impact is expected to come from North Korea's only ally, China.
China strongly condemns this act. It's China's consistent and staunch position to realize denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula, prevent nuclear proliferation, and maintain peace and stability in Northeast Asia. We strongly urge North Korea to abide by its commitments.
But it's unclear how far the US and China will be willing to take further sanctions. That's because they're expected to have a ripple effect and hurt the Chinese economy. If Kim Jong-un is prepared to bite the only hand that feeds him, is North Korea as reliant on China as it appears? North Korea has started 2016 with a powerful provocation and now certainly has the attention of global leaders. Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Joining me now to talk about North Korea's claims that it has tested a hydrogen bomb is Jim Hoare. He's an associate fellow of the Asia program at Chatham House. He also established the British Embassy in Pyongyang. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. They say they've got the bomb, the hydrogen bomb. Do you believe them?
Oh, I don't know. The North Koreans say lots of things, and you always have to have a degree of skepticism, I think, when you judge their statements. I think they have a nuclear program, and I suspect that ultimately they would want a hydrogen bomb. But whether they've got it at this stage, I don't know. And there's clearly a lot of skepticism internationally about their claims, and the evidence doesn't really seem to back it up. But it's still very early days, and there's more evidence should emerge. But again, it may not be conclusive.
Yeah, it could be really worrying if they're right and they're not lying. I wonder, China is North Korea's biggest ally, biggest backer. Do you think the Chinese are running out of patience with the North Koreans diplomatically?
I think one shouldn't underestimate Chinese patience. The relationship between China and North Korea is a complicated one and much more difficult to sort out than people sometimes think. It's not just an easy relationship where the Chinese say, you do this to the North Koreans, and they follow. They don't. The two sides, China and North Korea, don't particularly like each other, but there are advantages for both sides in them keeping together. China has economic interests in North Korea. North Korea has considerable interest in keeping open channels through China for goods and equipment.
At the cultural approach, the media approach, and the popular approach towards North Korea, East and West, left and right on the political spectrum, there seems to be, a caricature figure of Kim Jong-un. His dodgy haircuts, his chubby cheeks, the ridiculous stage-managed totalitarian parades. Amid all of that, while everybody's making fun of North Korea, are we seriously underestimating the danger posed by North Korea?
I have never thought it was a very wise approach to make fun of international leaders, whoever they are. And the Koreans are particularly sensitive about their leaders. This is true of Koreans north and south, that they don't like them to be criticized, they don't like them to be made fun of. And so not a good move to make fun of them. But I think North Korea is a potential threat in the region. It's probably not really much of a threat further into the world, apart from the possible business of selling weapons or nuclear technology. Not that there's any sign they have done that. So it's a mistake just to concentrate on what seems to be the more outrageous things. They're not so different from what happens in a lot of other countries.
Fascinating picking your brain. Thank you very much for joining us, Jim Hoare. In today's Picture This, a group of armed protesters have taken over a federal wildlife reserve in the U.S. They're demonstrating against government control of land and resources in Oregon State and other parts of the American West. But the government and a local Native American tribe has called on the protesters to leave. Let's take a look at how the ongoing siege has played out.
So they just need to get the hell out of here. Sorry, but because we didn't ask them here.
Today's newsmaker has been Charlie Hebdo. A year ago today, an attack on the magazine's headquarters left 12 people dead and sparked outrage across the world. It also divided sentiment, as many said the cartoonist's pen had crossed the line. The anti-religion magazine was accused of Islamophobia, of going too far with its satirical humor. Others say that Charlie is a hero, a symbol of freedom of expression, of the power of the pen over the gun. Opinion remains divided, but less than 2 months after the November the 13th attacks that left 130 people dead, not far from the Charlie Hebdo offices, France remains a country on edge. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Gupta. As always, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.